You're listening to Simply the Best Sports Take, the best podcast breaking down the best stuff in sports with host Sean Bingham. His takes are so good, he dropped the mic, but then you wouldn't be able to hear him, and that would suck.
Welcome into STB Sports Take, Simply the Best Sports Podcast. I am your host, Sean Bingham. Thank you for being here. We are on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor Podcasts, everywhere you get your podcasts. We are there. Please hit that subscribe button. Guys, you may have noticed two things today. One, I'm not alone. Alan Malai is here with us, college football guru. Love the guy. He's going to have a whole lot to say. As you can see by the helmets behind him, he's got big brother BYU and then little brother Utah.
I got two.
Oh, shoot. Okay. The second thing you might have noticed is that I sound and look sick, and you would be right. So today's podcast should be brought to you by Theraflu. So Theraflu, if you're out there, please send me some more stuff. I love your product. I've been sick for a few days, Alan, and I'm finally on the mend, but still you can hear it in my voice. But we're going to dive into BYU football. We're going to dive into Utah football. We're going to dive into the NFL. We've got tons to talk about. Going to dive into the chants that Oregon fans were making. Interesting stuff there. But before we do all that, I need to take a quick 2 minutes, 1 minute even, and make mention of one of my favorite athletes of all time, Roger Federer. Roger Federer is retiring. To me, he's the greatest tennis player of all time. At one point, he held the most Grand Slams. He held the record for most Grand Slams for several years after he passed Pete Sampras. He since has been passed by Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal, but I still consider him the GOAT. For 237 consecutive weeks, Alan, that's 4.5 years. This guy was number one in the world for 4.5 straight years, week after week after week. Like, absolutely incredible. So to me, when I think of guys that dominated their sport more than anyone, I think of Roger Federer, Tiger Woods, Michael Jordan. And so hats off to an amazing career for Roger Federer. Love the guy, super classy. He's got one more event and then he's done. So appreciate greatness. One of the all-time greats, if not.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Who was more dominant, Roger Federer or Oregon's offensive and defensive line versus BYU?
And just like that, we transition. So let's dive into it. I mean, that was something you and I had texted about, that the offensive and defensive line, and you know linemen and their positioning and their jobs a lot better than I do, because you played that. But I mean, come on. I mean, BYU's offensive line and especially their defensive line were just getting pushed around all game long, and I thought that was BYU's strength. So what's going on?
You know, if you listen to Kalani in the post-game press conference, or even in an interview he did while getting on the bus leaving the stadium, Kalani said he was embarrassed.
Yeah.
When Kalani first took over the BYU job, I sat with him in his office and I talked to him for about an hour, and he said he couldn't understand. He was actually shocked how small BYU was when he first got there. The Bronco kind of left the cupboards a little empty, you know?
Yeah.
He was coming from Utah. They'd been in the Pac-12 for a while. And BYU was he's like, we were small and we weren't very strong. And he says, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change that. That is my number one priority. And if you look over the last 7 years, like you always give a coach 4 years to get their recruiting class in and build their program, right?
Mm-hmm.
You give them 6, maybe 7, which Klein's in year 7 right now because we've got the mission thing, right?
Yep.
So Kalani's done that. He
has, and his first 4 years were like so. The last 3 have been really good.
Exactly. Yeah. And one of the biggest reasons is because he's been able to get in class after class after class of just, sure, he's improved the skill talent, and that'll get better when he gets into the Big 12. But his offensive and defensive line now has depth, now has size, now has strength. I mean, there's a reason Phil Still and Pro Football Focus ranked BYU's offensive line as top 5 in the country.
Yeah.
Even people are talking about them being the best offensive line. I don't think we can say that anymore.
No.
Expectations.
I mean, I don't know. I just was shocked. I was shocked to see us getting pushed around like that. And where do these same people that you're saying rank BYU top 5, where do they rank Oregon?
I'm sorry?
These same people that rank BYU's line top 5, where do they rank Oregon?
Oregon was ranked as one of the best offensive lines of the Pac-12, but they weren't getting the national pub that
Interesting.
BYU was.
Well, I wonder if they will now,
They
but
should. They should now. Absolutely.
but if you could silence your phone over there.
Yep. It's my laptop. Let me get that for you. Kind
No,
of
you're good.
Mickey Mouse operation am I running here?
You're good. So some bright spots for BYU. Jaron Hall, he had no interceptions and he had 305 yards, 2 touchdowns. A lot of that came towards the end. Wasn't it was kind of meaningless type of stats, empty calories, as they say. But I just feel like BYU's got to just take this as the wake up call that it is. BYU fans, take this as the wake up call that it is. The team is not great. They have potential. They're really good. But they're not great. Just because we beat Baylor does not mean that we, are national championship contenders. And I think that's the wake up call that BYU, it just feels like they're on the verge of greatness frequently, and they frequently get their heads too full of themselves, and then they drop a game like this. And so I just want to see BYU learn from their mistakes at some point and not do this.
As a Utah fan, I always cheer for BYU, but as a Utah fan, it was satisfying to see the fan base eat some humble pie last week, because we were hearing it. They're going to go 7-0 against the Pac.
Yeah.
Everything, defending Pac-12 champs. So it was a tough night for the defending Pac-12 champs.
It was. So
I think we got to harp on the offensive and defensive line play just a little bit more.
Yeah.
The Ducks scored in their first 6 possessions in that game. 5 touchdowns, 1 field goal.
Yep.
They ran for 212 yards in those first 6 possessions. They got a game worth of rushing yards in 6 possessions. They averaged 4.8 yards per carry. I mean, the defensive line was obliterated. The defense was obliterated. And then if you look on the offensive side of the ball, if BYU can't, everything with BYU starts with the run game. I think BYU is missing Tyler Algier a lot more than we thought they would. We thought Cook, the transfer from Cal, was going to be a little bit better. He seems a step slower than Tyler Algier.
Oh, for sure he is.
Yeah. Katoa actually looks better than he has.
I think Katoa is better. I think Katoa needs more carries.
I think as of right now, Katoa's in the starting spot. So I would probably expect him to see him starting next week. But total overall, BYU only got 83 yards versus Baylor, and you heard the media talking about it. It's like, well, Baylor's a tough defense. Baylor's tough. 83 yards is, we can accept that. Well, you only got 61 yards versus Oregon. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So now you're under 100 yards, and for 2 games in a row versus 2 Power 5 opponents. And I got to tell you, there's some real issues going on at BYU right now, because you can't pass the ball if you can't run the ball. Running the ball opens everything up. Now, people are going to come back and say, well, Jaron Hall had 2 touchdowns. He got those in garbage time.
They were garbage time. They were.
Or he got 1 in garbage time. And then he didn't turn the ball over.
Most of his yards were in garbage time. Yeah, the 1 touchdown was good. Well, and interestingly, this wouldn't have made a huge impact on the game, but there's 2 things. One, we're still without our 2 best receivers, although I think Chase Roberts has cemented himself as at least one of the top 2 receivers on BYU's team.
Well,
but I don't think that would have.
BYU's got some talent at receiver.
Yeah, they do.
Cooper and Romney come back, and you got Chase Roberts as your 3rd option. You're looking pretty good.
I think you're going to see Chase Roberts not as the 3rd option. That's kind of what I'm getting at. I think he's going to be more like the 2nd option, maybe, but we'll see. But so we're without Romney, without Nakua. I don't think that's going to impact. It's going to impact the final score, but it's not going to impact who won the game. Like Oregon was absolutely dominant, and they're winning.
I don't think it would have changed anything.
No. Maybe BYU gets an extra touchdown, so they lose by a little bit less, but that's best case scenario. The other thing that was concerning, though, and I said this in my last podcast, I said with Oldroyd missing those field goals versus Baylor, those are demons that are going to sit with him for a while, and he's going to have to. He comes out in the first half, kicks a field goal that would have it was a pretty important field goal at the time. Like it was a momentum type thing. And it's from 30-something yards, and he misses again. And I'm like, his confidence is shot. I don't know if you can stick with him at this point.
No, I don't think you can either. I was shocked. I mean, his nickname used to be Jake the Make.
Yeah. Now it's Jake the Shank.
You saw the look on his face when he went out there versus Oregon to kick that field goal. Yeah. And I had this sinking feeling. Like, I don't think he's going to make it. And he didn't just miss it. He shanked it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think if you're BYU, you're seriously looking at putting in your second string kicker because
Yeah,
but then again, you eventually want to get back to Jake, and if you bench him,
I know it hurts his confidence even more. It's like, what do you do? But I mean, it's the type of thing I said last podcast. You do this as a pro, and you're fired. Like you don't have a job because like you have one job on the team, and if you can't do it, I'm sorry, like you can't play. And so I don't know what they're going to do. I don't even know who the backup kicker is. I'd imagine he's at the college level. Usually the backup kickers are not very good. That's why they're backups. But that's a huge problem because to me, that was a momentum thing. That was just a deflating, like, you got to be kidding me. Because I think it was 17-7 at the time, and it could have been 17-10, made it a one-score game. There's just momentum there. Like,
totally different ball game. Different.
Yeah. So that was like super deflating. That sucked big time. Yeah. So one thing I want to talk about, because we do have to get into Utah football as well. But there was a chant. I'm sure you saw this on Instagram or Twitter, right? So the Oregon fans were caught on camera chanting "F the Mormons." Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to let you talk first about that.
Oh, I've got friends who have gone up to Oregon. They say they're just the worst fans, and this isn't the first time that they've chanted things at fan bases or at, BYU or even Utah. I'm less inclined to be offended. It's just name calling doesn't really make me mad. I think what the story is for this, because I mean the student section came out and apologized on their Twitter. The university came out and apologized on their Twitter.
Which really means the university came out twice on two different accounts. Yeah, because it's not like the students are actually apologizing, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm big on forgiveness. And so they said sorry. And the issue, I think the real story is that the national media. What's interesting is that it's coming in. What's interesting is that it's coming in on the heels of BYU being accused of their student section chanting and using racial slurs towards the women's Duke volleyball team,
which was factually proven to be false. It was made up.
Totally false. Nothing happened. It lit a media firestorm. I mean, Stephen A. Smith was bloviating, all over ESPN First Take. And it was national headlines. BYU was demonized. People still think it happened because they haven't heard, the truth. And this, apparently it's okay to castigate a religious institution. And it's not, there's no national headlines. There's no story. I think the media ignoring this story and blowing up the previous story that was false is I think that's the real story.
Yeah.
I mean, no big deal, Oregon. You apologize. Let's move on. But the national media needs to be held to account.
Yes. And so for me, like, I'm the same as you. I'm not offended. I actually don't really care. I've actually sat in the Utah student section and had very similar things said to me, very anti-Mormon, anti-religion type things were said to me.
Not true. Utah fans are great.
It's very true, but I didn't care.
Yeah, no,
to be honest with you, some of my own friends do it, so so I don't get offended at that stuff. I think it says a lot more about them than it says about, the people they're making fun of or whatever.
Sure.
But that being said, the double standard is outrageous. Can you imagine if this was like an anti-Muslim or anti-Jewish type chant? Can you imagine like the outrage? Like this would be national news. But for some reason, because it's a different minority religion, right? Somehow it's like, okay, it's like no one's talking about it. Will Kane and Clay Travis, they're the only two people I've seen mention it. I've scoured ESPN, nothing about it. Like the double standard is what just infuriates me. I don't care that Oregon chanted it. I mean, they can, again, if they want to be drunken idiots and sit behind the excuse of alcohol, even though it was very clear in reading Twitter accounts that there actually is no alcohol served in the student section at all. And it's very strictly enforced.
It's dry. Yeah.
So, to me, like, yeah, it makes them look really stupid, Oregon, that is. But the double standard makes everybody that blows everything else out of proportion look really stupid. It's like, okay, you don't get to pick and choose what's bigotry, what's inappropriate prejudice. And so to me, it really is annoying because of what BYU went through with a false accusation.
Literally 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is coming off the hills. It's like, what are we doing? Like, if it supports the narrative, it gets the pub. If it's against the narrative, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So Governor Cox tweeted it. That's when it started to get some attention a little bit, when he retweeted the video. But there have been some people, again, to Oregon's credit, they did apologize, did say it has no place at their institution. So we'll see if anything more comes of it. But the double standard is what bothers me the most, because if this chant had been made against a different religion like Judaism or Islam, it would have been national news, international news.
Yeah.
But because it's against the LDS Church, it barely makes waves.
Or Christians in general, right?
Yeah. Okay, so BYU drops in the rankings 7 spots. Utah rises 1 spot. Utah, they played another high school, right? Who did they play?
Well, they played a team that won 12 games last year, Mountain West, so a little bit better than high school. But thanks, Sean. Real cool. Why do I even come on here? I don't know.
No, let's talk about Utah. Utah rises a spot in the rise. Get it? Rising.
Hey, very nice.
They rising a spot, and BYU dropped 7 spots. I think BYU deserved to drop 7 spots. Oregon jumped up 10 spots, by the way.
Yeah, but one last thing on BYU. BYU was the biggest loser last week in college football.
Yeah, they were.
Only 3 top 25 teams lost. It was Michigan State. They got upset by Washington. Miami lost, and then BYU lost.
Yep.
But BYU was. I mean, College Game Day. Everybody picked BYU to win.
Yeah.
Everyone was riding the BYU train, and they just went out there and choked.
Yeah, they did.
There was college football playoff talk.
I don't know if they really choked though, dude. They just got outplayed. Like they were just less athletic. It looked like,
Well,
but
I knew. I mean, this is true for most teams that play Oregon. Like your skilled positions aren't going to be as good, athletic, or as fast as the Oregon Ducks. That's just not going to happen. I mean, that's back in the days of DeAnthony Thomas.
You heard that guy.
I knew BYU was going to struggle, but especially without Puka and Gunner out there as well. But I didn't think. Again, the surprise was the offensive and defensive line. That's why Kalani said he was embarrassed. That's where Kalani prides himself. Yeah. Kalani's turning BYU into Utah 2.0. You know what I mean? Starting with the trenches, building inside out, and they just didn't show up. And so I think if they played well, I think BYU had a real shot. They still might have lost. They probably would have lost in hindsight, but it wouldn't have been like that. Yeah. I'm not surprised that BYU lost. I'm surprised they lost like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, go Utes. Utah's better. Whatever.
Okay, so let's get into that. I don't have any notes for me on the Utah-San Diego State game. If you want to say a quick thing or two, go for it. I do have some other things I want to talk about though with Utah after.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I think I think Utah's notorious for starting out slow with the season. Playing Florida, I think you saw that Florida loss is looking worse and worse as the season goes on.
That's one of my notes. Yeah.
Yeah. But playing in the swamp, that much hype, game 1, no film. Like I can almost give Utah a pass. Nevertheless, they should have won that game. There's no excuse. Utah's a better football team. They start slow. Utah versus San Diego. That first quarter and a half was probably the worst offensive football that I've seen Utah play in over a decade. We're talking worse than the Travis Wilson era. You know what I mean? I mean, it was. I was losing my mind. I was like, "What's going on?" Yeah, our buddy Dave Glauser shoots me a text. He's like, Cam Rising's twin who can't play football is starting for Cam.
Yeah,
like it was terrible. The offensive line wasn't blocking, and then they're just like in good old Utah fashion. It's like, oh wait, we're better than most people we play. Let's actually play football. And then they scored 35 points in the next quarter and a half. And then Kyle Whittingham, being the classic guy that he is, which as a fan kind of bothers me, he did everything he could to not score 49 or 50 plus points against San Diego.
Yeah.
He's like, we'll put on our second string. We're just going to run it in the middle and run out the clock. I'm like, guys, just throw 50 up. You know what I mean? They talk, but Utah's right where they want to be. Where they really need to figure it out, and what's really got me questioning what they're going to do on the season is their front seven. Landon Barton had a good game. Kyle Whittingham called him the future of Utah football. I think that's right. But Mohamed Diabate was out, the transfer from Florida. He hasn't really played as well as we thought he would throughout the season. Mm-hmm. The defensive line, I call it the Kalani effect. Okay. So you're looking at NFL guys on BYU's offensive line and defensive line, and we've already talked about how he's built that from the inside out. He's building Utah 2.0. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons why Utah has been so good on the offensive and defensive line forever is getting that Polynesian talent. Kalani was instrumental in recruiting, big dudes, Polynesian or not, but get like Starlo Tulele, all those guys that came out there. Like, I was talking to Michael Elisa that played at BYU. He's like, we couldn't handle Star. He was just too good. Mm-hmm. Utah's always had anywhere between 1 to 3 defensive linemen that go pro. Mm-hmm. That's just, at any given time, they've got 1 or 3 dudes up front. They got those dudes. They don't have those dudes this year. Maybe they'll step up and they'll start showing up throughout the season. But as of right now, they are not there. The offensive line is going to come together just fine. They might send a guy to the pros. But that defensive line is worrisome. Until they get that figured out, I don't think Utah's going to repeat. And that defense needs to figure out how to cover mobile quarterbacks, because when they play Caleb Williams in a few weeks, who's one of the best running quarterbacks in college football. Yeah. If they don't figure it out by then, they're going to lose.
Yeah. So, interesting note that I made. So I had the same note that you did, that the Florida loss is actually looking worse and worse. Florida is proving to be a pretty average team. And they're what's that?
I said, yay. It's just fantastic.
And that's by far the best team that Utah has played. I mean, they played San Diego State. They played legitimately, I can't remember who it was, Southern Utah or Dixie. Who did Utah play the other?
I don't even remember.
But it was like not a D1 team, right? It's Utah Tech or whatever it is. Yeah. And then they played Florida and they lost to Florida. So, I got a little note here. We got 10 minutes left. So sorry, I got distracted there for a second. So they played Florida, and they lost that game. And now Florida the next week loses to Kentucky, which Kentucky's actually proven to be a very good team. It looks like. But then they play USF, which is, of course, the same school that BYU played first game of the season. BYU beat South Florida 50-21. South Florida gave that game away to Florida yesterday. I watched it intently, just like because I wanted to see. Okay, these are Utah and BYU's week 1 opponents playing each other in the swamp. Okay, at Florida. Hang on, let me finish. Let me finish. You're gonna have your chance for your rebuttal. They botch a snap. Okay. They're down 3 and they are driving. South Florida is driving a game-winning drive, okay? And they are well within field goal range at this point. Right. They botch a snap that pushes them back 15 yards. Literally, the snap goes, quarterback's in shotgun, low snap, goes back 15, 17 yards. Running back has to dive on it. They waste like 15 seconds of clock. They lose 15 to 17 yards of field position. Like, it completely ruined their chances for a game-winning touchdown. Now they just have a chance to try and get a game-tying field goal. And the snap on the field goal is perfect. And the guy on the hold botches the hold. And so they missed the game-tying field goal. They literally gave that game away. Like, South Florida should have won that game. They didn't. In the end, they didn't. Florida beat them by 3, just like they beat Utah.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like, I don't know. Like, obviously, Utah won. They're 2-1. They're ranked higher than BYU. BYU got killed yesterday by Oregon. Honest opinion, if BYU and Utah were to play this year, this next week, we'll say, who do you think would win?
Put a feather in that for 5 seconds. I just have to point out to the viewership that Sean is hate watching Utah so thoroughly. He's watching USF versus Florida just so he can talk crap on Utah.
No. Hey, what have I always said? I love the sport most. BYU could get rid of the athletic program. I'd still watch college football.
I think if they played, I think Utah wins, but I think it's a real tough game. I think it's a real tough game.
Sorry, I fell asleep there. What'd you say?
Uh,
Just kidding. No, so I'm gonna say I don't know. I've not been paying as close attention to Utah as I do BYU. What I have watched of Utah, which I did catch a good amount of the Florida game. And I did follow at least along with the San Diego State game online.
We watched the Florida game together, and you were cheering for Florida. That was real cool.
Yeah. It's the fan base, our fan bases don't like each other. That's just what it is,
I don't know why I like you. I like you, Sean.
I mean, you got a big BYU helmet behind you there.
Hey, I root for both teams except when they play. I root for Utah.
Yeah. No, that's fair. No, it'll be fun. It'll be fun for BYU to get into the Big 12 next year. I'm excited to finally be part of a big conference, have both of the main schools in the state part of legitimate big conferences, and see what can happen. Obviously the Big 12 won't be the same without Oklahoma and Texas, but that could give BYU a chance to win the Big 12 championship within the first couple of years, I would think, honestly.
Sure.
So we'll see what happens there. I agree that it would be a very close game, and I'd probably say I'd give the edge to whoever was playing at home, if BYU and Utah were to play this year. But
here's the thing, and as a Utah fan, it's so frustrating. I live in a world where Utah's been in the P5 for 11 years now.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, we cannot recruit receivers. Like BYU has better receivers all the time, every time. And this is no offense to Utah's receivers, especially my boy Devon Vele from American Samoa. He's good, but like we just don't have that dog. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
We got 3 dudes right now that are gonna they're either gonna get drafted or invited to camp. You know what I mean? We don't have one of those guys.
Yep.
And it's just like, if they could figure that out, you know what I mean?
Well, I think a big part of it is BYU has been known historically as a great quarterback team. Yeah. And I mean, Zach Wilson just went number 2 in the draft. Jaren Hall will absolutely get drafted. Yeah. And so when you have like a NFL caliber quarterback, you're going to attract more receivers to your team. I think that's a big part of it.
Everyone says Jaren Hall's an NFL caliber quarterback, and I agree with that. But what nobody's talking about is like he got praise at the end of the game last week, for not turning the ball over, throwing a couple of touchdowns, getting some yards.
Mm-hmm.
Jaren Hall they're not asking him to do much. You know what I mean? If Jaren Hall is this NFL quarterback, open up the playbook. Let's see it. Yeah. I mean, I don't. You don't want let's get him on some runs. Maybe not a lot because he's fragile. You know what I mean? But let's see him make these NFL throws. Let's see him throw down the field.
Yeah.
The majority of his passes versus Oregon were 10 yards. You know what
That's
I mean?
The majority of his passes all season. His yards per attempt are pretty low, but his total yardage and his touchdowns and interceptions, all those numbers are really, really good. So
they look great, but they're not. If he's this good, take some risks with your guy.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and maybe they're easing into
it. Playing him with kid gloves. He's throwing the ball with kid gloves. Like open it up. Yeah. Let's see if he's this good.
Yeah, I do agree. I'd like to see them do a little bit more down the field. And who knows what the strategy is there? It's early season stuff. I don't know. That's another thing with BYU I wanted to mention. It's kind of a bummer that BYU, because they're independent and they're not Notre Dame, all of BYU's toughest games are early, always. And at the end of the season, that's when we get like the Idahos and these teams that like we know we can steamroll. And it's just a bummer that we have to play Baylor, Oregon, like just boom, 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 boom. Like it's always like that at the beginning of the year for BYU. And I'm excited to get into a conference to where it'll shift to where we can play some of these easier schools up front. And I don't know if you heard this podcast a few weeks ago, but I wish college football had a legitimate preseason game that did not count at all, period. Like it was wiped clean, but it was a true preseason game. I really wish they would do that.
One of these days we'll have to do a podcast where we just talk about what college football should be. Like this is how it should work. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because I've got some great ideas. I think it would solve.
And you do. I've heard them. We've only got 3 minutes left here, Alan. So we're gonna have to wrap up. I have to say something real quick. I promised our good friend Angie Kramer. You know Angie. She called me 2 days ago, or maybe it was yesterday. It's 2 days ago. I think it was on Saturday. Yeah. And she was like, she's like, I got a bone to pick with you. You never talk about my Detroit Lions on your podcast.
Oh,
And I, of course, talked trash to her. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know they still had a team up there in Detroit,
sure.
And I realized that the Lions were playing the Commanders, which is my favorite team, of course, the Washington Commanders.
The Redskins, yeah, got it.
Formerly the Redskins. And wouldn't you know it, the Commanders go down 22-0. Okay. At halftime, it's 22-0. They make a comeback. I'm like, please win so I don't have to go eat humble pie publicly on the podcast. But the Commanders lose 36-27. So shout out, Angie, to you and your Lions getting it done against my Commanders. Making me look like an idiot.
You're a Redskins fan and a Cougar fan. I don't even know why you like sports. That's tough.
I think that's why I like sports more than I like teams. When you're rooting for the Jazz, the Cougars, and the Redskins or the Commanders, I mean, you got to just choose to love the sport first, right?
I was scrolling through Instagram the other day, and this Michael Jordan highlight reel came on. I'm like, yeah, I like Michael Jordan. Who doesn't like Michael Jordan? And then halfway through, it just cuts to the full play of him like pushing off Brian Russell and shooting that jam. I was like, it still hurts. Still hurts. Like 20 years later, it still hurts. Still hurts.
Yeah. Okay, this is the last thing, and then we do got to end it here. So, Alan, thank you for being here. But one thing I wanted to say just in closing here, guys. Jimmy G, yesterday, Trey Lance goes down with a season-ending injury. I feel for the kid. He finally gets his chance to start in his second game. In the first quarter, busts his ankle. It's just, really bummer. But Jimmy G comes in, they win handily. Jimmy Garoppolo is the most disrespected quarterback in the NFL. They literally win when he plays and they lose when he doesn't, consistently for like several seasons now, and yet they still don't want him. So to me, it's ludicrous. I had to end with that. Alan, we have like 10 seconds, so thank you.
Let me just say this. If there's any two quarterbacks that I want to party with in the NFL, it's Trey Lance and Jimmy G. Let's go.
I like it. Guys, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for being here. We are out. Peace.
Thanks for hanging with Simply the Best Sports Take. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and check out stbsportstake.com. Simply the best in sports.